Hi, welcome to HowtoDandD. My name is Fred Weller, and today I want to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. Yes, because I usually do. It's taken me a while. I have been doing Monster Lore, and today AJ Pickett, I talked to him a couple of days ago, and he said, Fred, it's time to double down. So I'm doubling down. Every week there will be Monster Lore, and today is the Bulette. Now I know what you're thinking. No, it's the Bulette or the Bulette. No, actually, the correct pronunciation is Bulette because it's French, and that's because a lot of the consonants and vowels in French, the French language, are not pronounced. You don't actually pronounce them anymore. You used to, but you don't now. And this monster is a play on the fact the French language is so hard to understand and to communicate with because of all of these silent sounds in the words. So it's a bit of a plug at the Bulette in many respects, and for those of you who feel like that's the wrong pronunciation, I frankly don't care. Okay, it's cool. You do whatever you're going to do with it. For me, it doesn't matter. But there is a lot to say about the Bulette, so let's get on with the task at hand. Aptly called the land shark, the Bulette, pronounced Bulette rather than the Bulette, as I said, is a terrifying apex predator. And it lives only to eat, much like the standard shark. For those of you who are familiar with a shark, it's very much like that. It just swims around, okay, and then it eats, and then it makes babies, and then it continues on that cycle. And that's really all it does. The Bulette is universally shunned, even by other monsters, and it doesn't form any kind of relationship or alliance for mutual benefit. This is not something that usually happens. You'd have to force it into assisting you, and that's kind of difficult to do. It is rumoured that the Bulette is a cross between the armadillo and a snapping turtle, but this is only conjecture. We don't know for sure. Like many Dungeons and Dragons monsters, the speculation is that a wizard did some sort of experiment, infused demon ichor into this beast, and it is now a terrible plague on the world, the Bulette. The Bulette's head and hind portions are usually blue to brown, and they are covered with a dense plate or plates along its body or scales. Some of these plates are larger, some of them are smaller, ranging in colour from grey-blue to blue-green. The Bulette's nails and teeth and claws are made of some very dull-coloured ivory, and ivory, as you know, is very strong. The area around the Bulette's eyes are a brown-black colour. The eyes are yellowish, and the pupils are a deep green colour, or deep blue-green colour. The eyes of the Bulette are positioned on the side of the creature's head like a shark, although they are often drawn incorrectly in depictions, suggesting that the eyes are actually in the front of the head, but they are not. They are actually on the sides. Now, recently it's come to my attention that there's very little biology on this creature. The Bulette's biology has been a bit of a mystery, and I only just recently discovered some artifacts that explain a bit more about the biology of the Bulette. The eyes of the Bulette have a near 360-degree field of vision. Much like a shark, they have two blind spots, one behind the head and one in front of the snout. So those are the good places to be if you don't want to be eaten. The skin underneath and between the Bulette's armoured plates is extremely flexible cartilage with an anti-angiogenic property. Now, what that basically means is it stops it getting sick, getting parasites living off it, stuff like that. So it's pretty resistant to parasites and other things living off it for mutual benefit, or living off its blood, you might say. The Bulette's blood has an extremely high concentration of white blood cells, making it immune, or its immune system extremely strong, far more efficient than other creatures, which means it doesn't get sick very often. The armour plates of the Bulette are made of a dense fibrous dermal bone that make it difficult for weapons and a beast's teeth or claws to penetrate. The stomach acid of the Bulette is exceptionally corrosive and can break down anything, including toxins and bacteria that would normally kill another creature. Now, the reason is they have a near zero power of hydrogen level, which is basically they have a near zero pH, essentially extremely acidic. The Bulette can tolerate high levels of carbon dioxide, far higher concentrations than other creatures, and this is because their blood cells have a special form of hemoglobin that uses oxygen more efficiently and effectively, and this allows them to remain underground for long periods of time. In fact, they can actually sleep underground if they need to. The teeth of the Bulette are a triangular shape like a shark with a fine serrated edge for sawing through bone and other hard substances when it's eating its prey. There's multiple rows of triangular teeth in a Bulette's mouth, and they are specially designed to kill and feed on the prey. Like they are there, obviously, to rip through pretty much anything. When burrowing through underground, the land shark relies on vibrations to detect prey with their sensitive ear holes. Now, these ear holes have a cover. It's like a flap of protective skin that drops down and can be lifted up, and it's more like a valve if anything else. So it can close that valve and stop soil and other things getting into it, and then it can open it up so it can actually listen underground. It doesn't, unlike a mole that would use its sense of smell, or another creature that might be relying on a different form of we're looking at vibration here, so it really is about it doesn't have a sensitive skin like a worm, so it can't feel the vibration, so it has to listen. So that's why it has these specialized holes or ears. Now, the Bulette, its combat efficiency is extremely high because it is an apex predator. It pretty much has everything down. It can do almost anything efficiently and effectively. A Bulette will attack anything it regards as edible, including, unfortunately, its own offspring. Sharks do this as well. When a Bulette senses movement, the monster breaks through to the ground surface and then attacks whatever is closest, generally. A land shark has a temperament akin to a wolverine, quite stupid and mean and quite fearless, actually. The size and strength and numbers of its opponents or its prey means absolutely nothing to the Bulette. It doesn't care. It will just attack it. The Bulette always targets the easiest and closest prey unless it has a chance to sniff out or spot a halfling. If there's a halfling around, it's probably going to change its targets to that halfling because they like halflings quite a lot. When attacking, the Bulette employs its large jaws and its front teeth, much like a cat. So you have two claws come out, usually the front ones, grabs onto the creature, tears it, and then brings in its teeth to actually bite and rend. The land shark can jump vertically between 8 and 15 feet, and it can actually jump up to 30 feet if it has sort of a run up as well. And that's more of a long jump rather than a high jump. And it does this at blinding speed. It's extremely quick. Now, why does it jump? Now, usually it would be used as a way of escaping. Usually it's going to jump to escape from being cornered if it is actually in bad shape or it's injured. This doesn't happen very often. A lot of the times a Bulette will also use the jumping feature to actually crush its enemy as an attack. While in the air, the Bulette strikes with all 4 feet when it lands on something, which of course you don't want this thing because it's really heavy and it's going to hurt you. The land shark has 2 vulnerable areas: the shell underneath its crest and also its eyes. Its eyes are very sensitive to damage. This is probably the only parts of the body that aren't heavily armoured. The shell underneath the Bulette's crest is only raised during intense movement, and the Bulette's eyes are sort of like a small oval area. They're about 8 inches across, so it's not a particularly large target, but it's big enough if you're accurate with an arrow, you might be able to shoot it in the eye. You probably don't want to be up close when you're fighting this thing, but we'll talk more about that. Now, the habitat and society of a bullet, well, let's say fortunately for the rest of the world, the bullet is a solitary animal. And although mated pairs will share the same territory, they don't mate that often, and there usually isn't a huge society, or they don't move like a herd. They don't move like a pack. They're usually on their own. A bullet rarely forms a mated pair because it usually means the smaller male bullet is going to be killed and eaten after the mating takes place. The mating ritual of a bullet is kind of strange, and we're going to mention it. It usually involves the male killing a large number of deer, positioning them in a circle, and then the bones are removed. It tears all the flesh off, pulls all the bones out, chews up the bones into a fine dust, and then lines a pit that it digs in the ground in the centre of this circle of deer corpses to attract the mate, the female. Very strange. So the scent is supposed to be attractive to a female. The male then hides in the pit under the ground, and then when the female comes close, it engages in a surprise reproduction session, you might say. It basically jumps the female, and then as soon as it's done its business, it then tries to run away. It's not always successful, hence why I said they often get eaten, because the female is larger. In addition, other predators rarely share the same territory as a land shark for fear of being eaten, as this is in fact an apex predator in the world. The bullet has no lair, preferring to wander over its territory above and below ground, but usually below ground. It will burrow down beneath the soil to rest, so that's where it tends to sleep. It doesn't usually sleep above ground. Since the bullet's appetite is so voracious, each land shark has a large territory that can range from about 30 square miles. It's a very large area. Bullets consume their victims, not just their victims, but their clothes, any weapons they have, any equipment they are carrying. It all goes down. The bullet's powerful stomach acids, as I mentioned before, quickly digest things such as metal armor and weapons, including magic items. Any magic items that have been swallowed, sitting in the stomach for too long, and they disappear because they will be corroded. That's how strong that acid is. And potentially magical in some nature as well. A bullet is not above nibbling on some sort of iron chest or treasure chest or a sack of coins either, because look, a bullet's motto has always been eat first and think later. When everything in a territory is eaten, the bullet will move in search of new territory. The sole criteria for a suitable territory is the availability of food. So a bullet will occasionally stake out a new territory near a human settlement, or a halfling settlement would be the best place, terrorize them and take over that territory. Very little is known about the life cycle of the bullet, but sages have many sort of theories. The bullet presumably hatches from an egg, but no young have actually been found yet, though small land sharks have been killed and found in the past. It may be that the bullet is hatched from a very small egg, and then only a few of the young from the eggs actually survive to maturity. So as a result of that, we've very rarely seen any young bullet. Still, other sages have theorized that the bullet bear their young live, basically a mammal. There is also evidence that the bullet, like the carp and the shark, grow larger as they get older, because unusually large land sharks of up to 11 feet tall and taller have been seen in the past. Certainly no one has ever come across the carcass of a bullet that died of old age, and so it's difficult to actually determine how long they live. And I think nobody's ever come across the carcass or remains of a bullet that died from a disease. That just doesn't seem to happen either. I'm sure it can, but so far we haven't found any evidence. Now, the ecology of the bullet it has a devastating effect on the ecosystem of any area that it has inhabited. Literally nothing that moves is safe from the Bulette. Humanoids, animals, monsters, doesn't matter. Much like sharks and that get older and larger, the Bulette will cannibalize their own species. So larger Bulette will certainly eat smaller Bulette given the opportunity. The only things that Bulette do not eat or refuse to eat are actually elves, and they really dislike the taste of dwarves, but that doesn't stop them killing the elves and the dwarves in the first place. The Bulette is always hungry and is constantly roaming its territory in search of food because of its high metabolism. Its metabolism is so fast because of that concentrated acid in its stomach. The most common food source for the Bulette is herd animals or beasts such as deer, elk, buffalo, cattle, cows, sheep and horses. A Bulette will migrate with its main or common food source, which tends to be herd animals. So as you see a herd move on, the Bulette will follow if the Bulette hasn't eaten the entire herd so far. Halflings are the Bulette's favourite snack food. Now why? Because a halfling's positive attitude in life, their plump body fat, and they have a fragrant smell that the Bulette just love. In the process of hunting and roaming, the land shark will uproot trees, particularly, even it doesn't matter how big these things are, it will leave the ground disturbed with holes everywhere. In hilly and rocky terrain or regions, the underground movement of a Bulette can start a small landslide. The Bulette doesn't dig more than about a few dozen feet below the ground surface. Now, because its food source is not that deep, so it doesn't go too deep into the ground. Okay, it doesn't, and also too, its ability to absorb oxygen and contend with carbon dioxide would be reduced the deeper it goes. Creatures such as, or monsters such as ogres, trolls, and even some giants all move off in search of greener and safer pastures when a Bulette appears. A Bulette can turn a peaceful farming community into a wasteland in a short space of time, maybe a couple of weeks. So no sane humanoid will remain in the region where a Bulette has been sighted. There is only one known benefit to the existence of the Bulette, and that is the large plates on its body behind its head make superb superior shields, and dwarven smiths have fashioned these things into magical shields. That's how good that particular plate is. Some also claim that the soil which the Bulette has passed through or comes in contact with is imbued with a magical effect which actually dissolves rock, some sort of rock dissolving property. It's much more likely that the Bulette's extreme acidic stomach acids are actually secreted as a form of sweating through the pores of its skin that is underneath or around its plates, or from its belly, that actually break down the soil that it's trying to dig through, so it makes it easier. Which means it can potentially dig through rock, but very slowly. If it was an area that was just full of smaller stones and so forth, that won't be too difficult, but solid rock, much more difficult. Many would argue, however, that these benefits are scarcely worth the price of having a Bulette in the world in the first place, and I'm not going to disagree with them. So how do you incorporate the Bulette into your adventure, whether it be Pathfinder, Dungeons & Dragons or other roleplay games? I've got a list of suggestions. I want to thank everybody who took part in a Dungeon Master Roundtable discussion around the Bulette, because I've taken a lot of your ideas and incorporated them in this case. Some of these, to be frank, are done where I am serious, and others are done in jest. You take what you want. Okay, it's all right. You don't have to like everything. Bulette can be a weapon used by a misguided army general thinking they can control the monster to attack their enemy forces, but instead it goes berserk and winds up rampaging through the army. Quite amusing, I would imagine. Look, a Bulette, if you try to control that and use it like a weapon, unless you have some way of controlling its mind, the chances are it's going to eat both armies. No problem. Using the Bulette as a travel mount requires a special saddle to be mounted on it. Also requires some sort of mind control collar to be in place, or some sort of spell that would affect its mind so you can actually control it. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. As far as I know, only elves have been successful in using a monster like this as a mount. And also, you have to run into the problem if you can't control it, it will try to go down into the ground, and you can't really survive on the mount underground. So you've got to try to keep it above ground. There have also been potentially fearless rodeo riders. Like if you've ever been to a rodeo where they ride bulls, well, there are people out there, silly enough, to actually try to ride a Bulette. And these usually consist of stone colosseums where the floor and walls are made of reinforced granite. Sometimes pits are used, and this is where people will test their skill. Can you stay on for 8 seconds? And if you do manage to stay on for at least 8 seconds, can you avoid being eaten by the Bulette? Fun times. Humanoids and livestock can be mysteriously going missing, and then you have some sort of investigation leading to a Bulette hunting in the region. This is really the plot line to the old movie, the Tremors movie, with Kevin Bacon. Dwarven merchants and mining pack horses could be getting killed and eaten by an unidentified monster, and that would probably be the Bulette, because Bulettes, for some strange reason, like to target dwarven pack horses or mules. A Bulette in the act of performing a mating ritual. I kind of talked about what the mating ritual looks like. So you could actually have a scene and the player characters can come across them engaging in the reproductive process just by accident. It's kind of like stepping into did I really want to see this? Another thing, for those of you who are into extreme sports, there's also Bulette chariot racing, and another form of Bulette chariot racing on top of that, where you don't have a chariot, but it's called land shark surfing. So you have a shield, you have a chain, and the chain is connected to the Bulette, and basically it drags you for as long as it likes, until eventually it decides to go into the ground. Again, not a particularly good sport. It has a high fatality rate currently. You could have a tiny house that is strapped onto your Bulette to act as like a mobile home that moves around. And I'm going to suggest probably the only one capable of pulling this one off is going to be hillbilly elves. Have their own tiny homes strapped to the top of a Bulette. For those of you who like car racing and destruction derby, I'm going to suggest, what about Bulette destruction derby riders, where they paint a number on the side of their Bulette and then they use their Bulette and slam into each other as they're riding it until there's only one Bulette still alive. And of course, if the riders survive, that would be good too, but I don't think that's very likely. Again, a high fatality rate in this particular extreme sport. There's also the special dessert made from the Bulette, cream, flour, alcohol and sugar that is served in a fancy elf restaurant, and it's called the Flaming Creme Bulette. For those of you who are interested in adding something to your cuisine, I thought I would suggest this. It is around, it is a thing. The Dungeon Master needs to reproduce, not reproduce, because that's not what you want to do. The Dungeon Master wants to reduce the availability of magic items in their party. So if you make a fatal mistake, and a lot of monsters in Dungeons and Dragons have been created for this purpose, such as the Rust Monster and the Bulette, and that is if you've got too many magic items and you want to get rid of them and the players won't part with them, you do this as your technique. So you have the character who's loaded up with the most magic items being attacked by Bulette and eaten, and then it escapes by burrowing deep into the ground so they can't follow. And then, of course, within about 24 hours, the body of the eaten character dissolves, and all of their magic items are dissolved as well. And hala, you have reduced the number of magic items that were causing you problems in your game. Look, it is up to you whether you use that technique or not. I'm just suggesting it. Okay, so now with all of that, if you are actually having to face off against the Bulette, how do you defeat the Bulette in battle? at a distance, people, at a distance. You need to use ranged attacks, preferably ranged spells that affect the mind because of its armored body. So arrows bullets and even bolts probably aren't going to pierce this thing because its armor is so tough. So you really want to be targeting this thing with a spell that affects its mind rather than affects its armor class or its armor in some way. You really want to be targeting that instead. Stand on solid rock or stone, because a Bulette can't burrow through hard substances very quickly. It's actually quite a slow process for them because of and granite's a good one. There are other stones that it has trouble getting through, but I would recommend standing on stone. Yes, I took it very much from Tremors. Thank you very much, Kevin Bacon. Stay still and quiet, because a Bulette, while underground, can't detect your location with its tremor sense. Okay, its ability to actually feel vibrations through its ears if you stay still. So like, shh, don't speak too loudly, okay? Throw something where you want it to go and stay put so that it goes over there so you can go the other way. And also ask the halfling to act as bait so you can go land shark fishing, because halflings are obviously its first priority out of everybody else, so you might as well use the halfling for something useful. Now, the publications, the historical publication for the Bulette are as follows. This creature was actually created by Tim Kask as an accident in printing. So there was an accident that took place in printing, and then this Chinese plastic toy was being used as this monster, and they hadn't actually made a monster from it. And then, of course, Tim was watching Chevy Chase putting on a skit about land sharks, and suddenly it all came together and we wound up with the land shark. And of course, a play on French pronunciation to get its name. So a lot of things came into play to make the Bulette what it is today. It first appeared in Dragon Magazine #1 in 1976, and then following up from that the next year in the Monster Manual for First Ed Edition in 1977. And then after that we get Dragon Magazine number 74, and that was in 1983. And then the Monstrous Manual for Second Ed Edition, or Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Second Ed Edition in 1993, which I have a copy of myself. This is where I first sort of encountered this monster. And then the Monster Manual Third Ed Edition, published in 2000, had another version of the Bulette or land shark. And then very quickly, only 3 years later, because they did an update to version 3, we had 3.5, the Monster Manual. In 2003, we had another version of the monster, which was actually pretty much the same as the one from 2000. And then if we go a little bit further on, about 5 years, we had Dungeons & Dragons 4e put out a Monster Manual, and in 2008 we get a different look at the Bulette that, frankly, I didn't like. And then we have the Monster Manual in 2014 for 5e put out. And this is I think a pretty solid monster. I would say, frankly, at this point, the monster has not all of the lore and concepts behind it, but it has enough to do what you need to do with it. And look, I'm hoping that this was useful to you in some way. There's a lot here to think about and a lot of things that you can use. So please let me know in the comments your experience with using the Bulette or fighting the Bulette if you have done so in the past. And also, if you have any questions, put them in the comments section as well. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.